Masechet Menaḥot Daf Mem Zayin. A Baraita teaches Tenor Banan Kibsei Aseret En Mekadishin Et Halechem Ela Bishchita. When on Shavuot we bring the 2 kevasim along with the 2 loaves of wheat bread, the wheat bread becomes sanctified only at the time that one does shechita on the animals. What does that mean, to become sanctified? There's actually 2 levels of sanctification. The first level is Kedushat Damim, and these loaves will already have that monetary level of Kedusha once they are donated. Something that's donated to the Mikdash, now monetarily it belongs to the Mikdash. It still does not have Kedushat Haguf. It doesn't have inherent holiness, but the same way if you donated any item, a desk, a cup, so it has monetary value, the monetary value is holy. Nobody is allowed to use it. However, at that point you could redeem it and say, the monetary value of this bowl that this person donated, we are going to transfer to this money. And then with that money, the Bet HaMikdash could buy something else, and then that bowl is no longer sanctified monetarily. So you can transfer, you can redeem monetary Kedusha. You cannot redeem Kedushat Haguf. Kedushat Haguf means something is inherently designated to be a certain type of korban. Good. So this Baraita is saying that when you have the Shtei HaLechem, good, so the baker makes the Shtei HaLechem, very special, and now they're donated and they have Kedushat Damim. They're bought with the money of Machasita Shekel, so they automatically belong to the temple treasury. Can't use them for anything, for secular purposes. However, once you designate them and you say, okay, these are going to be used for Shavuot this year, and you do shechita on the kevasim, having in mind, okay, now we're going to link these with the Shtei HaLechem, then it becomes sanctified. That Shtei HaLechem becomes sanctified as Kedushat Haguf. Kesad, Shechatan Lishman Vezarak Daman Lishman, Kadash Halechem. And now we're going to go through various possibilities. When one does shechita of the animals for the proper, with the proper intention, and he also, the Kohen, sprinkled the blood of the kevasim, also with the proper intention, then that's the full process. That's 100%. The lechem will become sanctified, Kedushat Haguf. However, shechatan shelo lishman vezarak daman shelo lishman lo kadash halechem. If you did neither of them with proper intention, then the bread will not be properly sanctified. It'll just stay as bread that belongs to the Bet HaMikdash, but is not sanctified bread because he had the wrong intention when he was slaughtering the kevasim. He had intention that it's going to be some kind of other offering, and so nothing happens. Good. Those are the easy cases when it's all or nothing. Both the shechita and the zedika was done either lishma, it's good. Both not lishma, not good. Shechatan lishman vezarak daman shelo lishman halechem kadosh ve'eno kadosh divrei Rabbi Elazar ve'Rabbi Shimon omed lo'olam eno kadosh ad sheyishchot lishman ve'yizrok daman lishman. Now, what if you did the shechita for its sake? Okay, good, that's something. But then the zedika was not for its sake. In that case, we have a machloket. According to the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the bread is sanctified and not sanctified. We'll see exactly what that means. It's somewhat sanctified to some level, but not fully. That's according to the B. So you see, he's following this principle that the shechita does effectuate something. Even though the zedika was not lishma, the shechita already does something. However, the Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's not kadosh at all. But rather, you have to do the shechita for its sake and the zedika for its sake. If you did just the shechita for the sake of this type of offering, but not the zedika, then you know what? The bread stays just plain old monetary kedusha. It does not rise up to the next level of kedusha. Good. That's the Braita. We ask, my ta'amad Rabbi, what is Rabbi's source for saying that shechita is very important and will have some effectiveness if you just do shechita lishma, even without the zerika lishma. Tichtib, ve'et ha'ayil ya'aseh zebach shelamim laHashem al sal hamasot, lememra deshchita mikadesha. This pasuk is said regarding a nazir. Nazir, his ayil is also brought with sal matzot, with a basket of unleavened bread. And there also, it's the offering of that ram that permits the unleavened bread. So we're bringing a similarity between the two cases, and there it says the ayil ya'aseh zebach. So we're focusing on the word zebach, which means shechita, and so he shall offer the ram for a sacrifice, a peace offering, with the basket of bread. That shows that it's the slaughtering that will consecrate the basket of bread. Just like with the Nazir, so too here, on Shavuot, it's the slaughtering of the kevasim that sanctifies the bread. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Yaseh, Ad Yaseh Kol Asiotav. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, what's his reasoning? He'll point to the same pasuk, but he'll focus on the word Yaseh. Yaseh means that the actions that you do, the actions that you have to do for the korban includes all of the actions from shechita to kabbalah to holacha to zerika. And so all of the actions have to be done in order for the bread to become sanctified. And therefore, if you didn't do the zerika lishma, it doesn't matter that you did the shechita beforehand lishma. All the actions have to be done lishma, otherwise it does not become sanctified. Now, Rabbi, we ask, doesn't it say the word yaseh? What are you going to do with that word? And they'll answer, iketib zebach yaseh kedekamart. Hashtad ichtib yaseh zebach bameh yaseh bizbicha. He says, if the words were in opposite order and it said zebach and then yaseh, so then, yes, I would agree with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, because zebach means the slaughter, and then yaseh means and the next steps, including the zerika. Then I would agree that you have to sprinkle it in order to sanctify the bread. But it doesn't say that in that order. It says first ya'aseh and then zebach, which means the ya'aseh is not talking about all of the actions that one does with the korban, but rather specifically the slaughtering. That's it. And so therefore, as long as the slaughtering is done, lishma, the bread is sanctified, kiddushat haguf. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, haketib zebach. Rabbi Shimon, what are you going to do with that word zebach? Doesn't that sound like just shechita? Hahumi ba'eleh lechad Rabbi Yochanan. Damar Rabbi Yochanan, no, he still needs that word, zebach, to teach me the law of Rabbi Yochanan, who said that everybody agrees, including Rabbi Elazar, the Rabbi Shimon, that the bread has to be in existence at the time of shechita. Let's say the bread wasn't baked yet. Okay, so he takes the two sheep, he slaughters them, and then afterwards, he has the blood there, and then they go and they bake the bread, and they bring it. And then you sprinkle, having in mind that bread. That's certainly no good. That bread does not become sanctified because it didn't exist at the time of shechita. So even according to the Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, the time of shechita is something significant, but only because the bread has to be in existence. And that's what the word zevach teaches us. However, if he does the shechita lishma, but does not do the zerika lishma, that's what makes it sanctified. If the zerika is not lishma, then the bread is not sanctified, kiddushat haguf, at all. Good. My kadosh ve'eno kadosh. What does Rabbi Yehuda Nasi mean when he says it's holy and not holy? Two opinions. Abaye amar kadosh ve'eno gamur. Rava amar kadosh ve'eno nitar. Abaye says we consider it holy, it's just not fully consecrated. Rava said it's fully consecrated, but you can't eat it. That's all. But for any other purpose, we consider it fully consecrated, but just not going to be able to eat it. You have to burn it. My benaihu, what will be a practical difference between them? Ika benaihu lemitpas pidyono. Difference would be whether if you try to redeem the holiness onto money, will it work? Now the general rule is if something has only monetary value, then yes, you can transfer the holiness to money. If something is kiddushat haguf, then you cannot. And so we say, La baye, la tafis pidyono, la rava, tafis pidyono. Manuscripts have different options, and others switch it around. And it sounds like this is not the correct one. We should switch it around to make more sense. So according to Abaye, he's the one that said, it is kadosh, but not fully, meaning it has some degree of inherent holiness, but not totally. It has some degree of monetary holiness still, because it's not completely consecrated. And therefore, according to Abaye, if you transfer the holiness to money, that money will become holy. Okay, because it still has some monetary value, monetary holiness. According to Rava, he says it becomes fully consecrated. And so therefore, it's just you can't eat it. So since it's fully consecrated, if you try to transfer the holiness to money, nothing will happen. The money will still be secular money. The money has no holiness at all, because there's no monetary holiness. It all becomes kedusha taguf. Bishlama lerava, hainu deika ben Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now we understand, according to Rava, that what the difference would be between Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Because according to Rabbi, if you try to transfer the money, transfer the holiness to something else, then according to Rava, this is the way we understood it. Within Rabbi, Rava was explaining the opinion of Rabbi that said kadosh v'no kadosh. So according to Rava, his understanding of Rabbi, if you try to transfer holiness, then it would not transfer, because that bread is totally kadosh. Whereas according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he said that if the shechita was for lishma but not the zerika, then there's no holiness to it. Since it doesn't get any kedushat haguf, if someone tries to redeem the monetary value of the bread, it will work. It will completely transfer. So now we understand how according to Rava, there's clearly a practical difference between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi. Rabbi Shimon. But according to Abaye, we said according to Abaye, if you try to transfer the holiness, it will transfer, because it's not completely kedushat haguf. It still has some kedushat amim, and therefore you say, okay, the holiness of this bread will go to the money. The money does become kadosh, and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon also agrees that the money becomes kadosh, because he says there's no holiness at all of kedushat haguf to the bread. So what would be a practical difference between them? And the answer is Ika benayu leifsule beyose. The difference would be, would that bread become invalid if it leaves the temple courtyard? According to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, they would become invalid because they do have some level of kedushat haguf. And once something has a level of kedushat haguf and you take them out of the courtyard, they're invalid. According to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, they have zero kedushat haguf. It's only kedushat amim. So that you could take out. You want to use it later? Okay, bring it back in. No problem. And so it will not become invalid by taking it outside. Be'amine Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Rabbi Chia bar Abba. כבשי עשרת ששחטן לשמן וזרק דמן שלא לשמן, אותו הלחם מהו באכילה? Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak asked the question of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. If you have the sheep and you did shechita of the two sheep, and you had in mind is for the proper shalamim for Shavuot, for the lechem, but then you sprinkled the blood and you had in mind the wrong type of korban. Now, what happens to that bread? Can you eat it or not? Now, this seems to be the same question that we've been dealing with all along. So we want to clarify this question. Alibad deman. According to whom is he asking the question? If he's following the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, he says that zerika is what makes the bread sanctified, and therefore the zerika was shelo lishma, so surely the bread cannot be eaten. If he's following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says kadosh and not kadosh, okay, there were some two different interpretations of Rabbi, but whether you follow Abaye or Rava, they both agree that you cannot eat it. One says it's fully kadosh, but you can't eat it. One says it's semi-kadosh, but semi-kadosh also means you can't eat it because it's not fully kadosh. So they both think that you can't eat it. So far, everyone agrees that you cannot eat it. So what is the question? Ela alibad haytana. Rather, his question was for a following Tana, the Taneh Abu Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. The father of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba taught the following Baraita. שתי הלחם שיעשו בין שחיטה לזריקה, זרק דמן של כבשים חוץ לזמנן. רבי אליעזר אומר, אין בלחם משום פיגול. רבי עקיבא אומר, יש בלחם משום פיגול. If you have the 2 loaves of bread, and they were designated, and you did shechita of the kebasim, everything was good. But then the 2 loaves of bread went outside the courtyard after the shechita, but before the zirikah. Okay, that's going to make those loaves invalid. And then after that, he sprinkled the blood, and he had in mind when he sprinkled the blood that he is going to consume the sacrifice and the lechem at the wrong time, outside of the time. Now, the rule is that something becomes pigul only if that's the only problem with it. If it has another problem, then it's not pigul. Now, here's machloket. Because the bread is outside of the courtyard, does that count or not? Rabbi Eliezer says the lechem will not have a problem of pigul because it was outside of the courtyard, and therefore the wrong intention of the zirika will not affect it. Rabbi Akiba, however, says the bread will have pigul, even though it's outside the courtyard. Now, it's true, it's outside the courtyard, so that is another problem with it. But that problem is not going to affect the animal because the animal's in the courtyard. So the pigul intention of the animal will make the animal pigul. And because it is still connected, this is going to be the main point of Rabbi Akiva, even though it's outside the courtyard and invalid, still the zirika, the pigul zirika of the blood of the kebes still is sufficient to connect to the bread outside, sufficient enough that it makes it pigul. So now we're going to ask, well, if it's sufficient enough to make it pigul, does it also complete the sanctification of it? Okay, we're going to get to that in a second. Amar Rav Sheshat, Hai Tana Kerebi Sebira Lehu, Damar Shechita Mekadesha. Rav Sheshat explains that both of these Tanaim, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiba, they follow the opinion of Rabbi, who says that the Shechita is the main thing. If it's together during Shechita, it already has a significant level of if one has in mind the proper lishma intention during the time of shechita, then already the loaves will become sanctified to some degree. Mihu Rabbi Eliezer la ta'amed amar en zirika mo'elet layoseh, Rabbi Akiba la ta'amed amar zirika mo'elet layoseh. Now, so what's the root of the difference between their two opinions here? They follow their opinions that they say elsewhere, as we're about to prove, where the Rabbi Eliezer says that the zirika does not have an effect on something that's outside the courtyard, has no effect, and therefore it will not become pigul. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says that zirika can have an effect even for something that is outside the courtyard, and therefore, since the sprinkling had pigul intention, that affects the bread even though it's outside of the courtyard. Where do we see that they have a machloket about that? Titnan Mishnah Masechet Me'ila Emore Kodashim Kalim Sheyasu Lifnei Zirikat Damim. You have Kodashim Kalim like a Shalamim. The law is that one is not liable to Me'ila for if you partake of it until the zirika. Before the zirika, one is not liable to me'ilah. And so, let's say you have the innards that's supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach, and they went outside of the courtyard before the sprinkling of the blood. Rabbi Eliezer omer en ma'alin bahen ve'en chayibim alehem mishum pigul v'notar v'tameh. Rabbi Eliezer says, oh well, since they went outside, the sprinkling of the blood has no effect on them, and therefore, even though they did the sprinkling of the blood, there's one does not commit me'ilah by partaking of the emurim because they only become liable to me'ilah after the sprinkling. But they were outside, so it's as if the sprinkling did not affect them. And also, it's not going to be prohibited as pigul, again, because it was outside of the courtyard when he sprinkled the blood. It also is not going to get the status of notad and tameh, because only something that was inside and had the sprinkling done properly, then you have to consume it during the time period and not afterwards. But if it was outside, then you you couldn't consume it at all anyway. And it doesn't get the status of having a prohibition of tameh because the sprinkling would never affected it to begin with, and so one would not get karet if one consumed it. Now, all because the sprinkling does not affect it when it's outside. Rabbi Akiva Omer mo'alin bahen v'chayvin ahl mishum pigol v'notar v'tameh. Rabbi Akiva, however, says that this, even though you took the emudim outside, the sprinkling does affect it, and therefore once you do the sprinkling, one is liable to me'ilah. And now, if you had wrong intention, it will become pigul. And if you leave it over, it is notad. And if one eats it while tameh, they will be liable. Mai. This is the question according to Rabbi Akiva. This is the question that Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak was asking. What will be the status of this bread? Can one eat it according to Rabbi Akiva? Here's the two sides. Me de zerikat pigul kav'a lalechem bepigul beyoseh kabasar zerika shelo lishma name sharia le lalechem. Should we say that since the sprinkling with intention of pigul does, even though it does make it pigul, but you see that it does connect to the bread outside, and therefore it will designate the bread as pigul, just like meat that went outside. And so too, if you did zidika shelo lishma, that zidika, even though the zidika is a problem, it's invalid. The zidika is not for the sake of this korban. Nevertheless, even though there's a problem with it, maybe that zidika will still be effective to make the bread permitted. And therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, in this scenario, in this interpretation, that bread would be permitted. Or maybe Rabbi Akiva only applied his opinion lechumra, to say, listen, if you sprinkled the blood with pigul intention, then lechumra, we're going to be machmir and say that the meat that went outside or the bread that went outside is going to be pigul. We're going to be machmir. But we're not going to apply this to be mekel, to say that if you did the zirika shelo lishma, that even though you did it shelo lishma, still it's going to connect to the bread and make the bread permitted. We're not going to connect an invalid sprinkling to the bread to make it permitted, only to make it pigul. So that's the question. Matkif la Rav Papa, umimai dechi itnehu aberae pelige. Rav Papa challenges this interpretation of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. He says, how do you know that they're arguing about a case where the loaves went outside the courtyard and stayed outside the courtyard the whole time, even when it was at the time of sprinkling? Maybe they both agree that if the bread went outside the courtyard and stayed outside the courtyard during the time of sprinkling, that the sprinkling will not affect it at all. Ubahadad ailinu pelige. Rabbi Eliezer sabar la kerebi damar shechita mekadesha v'pasla lehu beyoseh. And the machloket is only where you did the shechita with the bread inside, everything was good. And then after the shechita, the bread went out, but then came back in. And then you did the zirika. That's the case. And in this case, Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says that shechita is what sanctifies the bread. And since it was already sanctified from the time of shechita, and now you took it outside, now it already becomes pasul. And now you bring it back in, since it's already pasul, it will not become pigul, because pigul is only if that's the only problem with it. And that's why it says it's not pigul. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Damar shechita la mekadesha. And Rabbi Akiva would agree with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who says that shechita does not sanctify the bread kiddushat haguf, and therefore, when you take it outside the courtyard, okay, so you took it outside the courtyard, so still only kiddushat tamim, so bring it back in, and it did not become pasul, and therefore, when he sprinkles the blood, now the bread is back in, and he sprinkles the blood with pigul intention, that's why the bread does become pigul. But we challenge this too. Hai mai, what is this? I amat bishlamad Rabbi Akiva kerebi sebira le, damar shechita mekadesha lehu, hainu dekamar Rabbi Akiva dekachi lehu bishchita, vatya zirika kab'a lehu bepigul. You have to say that Rabbi Akiva agrees with Rabbi, because then his opinion would make sense. He says that shechita with the bread inside will make the the bread sanctified, and that's why he says later on, according to Rabbi Akiva, since it's already been sanctified with the shechita, when he does the zedikah with pigul intention, then it'll make it pigul. That makes sense. It has to be sanctified first and attached to it, to the kevasim, so that when he does the pigul sprinkling, it will make it pigul. Ela iamat ke Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon sibirale damar zebicha la mekadesha zedikat pigul mi mekadesha. But if he follows the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who says that doing the zebicha does not sanctify the bread, so now the bread is not sanctified yet, and now he's doing the zedikah. Do you think that zedikah with pigul intention is going to make the bread sanctified? He has invalid intention regarding the zedikah. There's no way that will make the bread now sanctified, that was not sanctified and connected to the sheep beforehand. V'hamar Rav Gidel Amar Rav zedikat pigul ena mebi'a lidei me'ila ve'ena mosi'a midei me'ila. After all, to prove this, Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav that sprinkling of pigul will not cause something to be liable to me'ila and will not remove something from me'ila. What cases is that talking about? Ena mebi'a lidei me'ila be'emurei kodashim kalim. It will not cause something to be me'ila. That's if it's the innards of kodashim kalim. So you did shechita of kodashim kalim. Doing shechita does not make it does not bring me'ila yet. Only when you do the sprinkling. And so if you do the sprinkling, but the sprinkling has intention of pigul, then that sprinkling will not cause those emurim to become liable for me'ila. Ve'ena mosi'a midei me'ila bebisar kodshe kodashim. And similarly, if one does the sprinkling with intention for pigul, it will not remove me'ila. That's for kodshe kodashim, like a hatat or a sham, that the kohanim eat part of it. Those Kodesh Kodashim are liable to Me'ilah before the Zedikah, but once you do the Zedikah, then that permits the edible parts to be eaten by the Kohanim. However, if you have intention of Pigul when sprinkling it, then it will not affect it. So, since Rav Gidel, in the name of Rav, says that Zedikat Pigul does not affect a korban regarding me'ilah, then you see that it would make sense that according to Rabbi Akiva, the sprinkling with intention of pigul has no way of connecting it to the lechem. And so this reasoning would be wrong. However, and then we reject this. Lav itotab de Rav Gidel amar Rav, this whole statement of Rav Gidel amar Rav itself is rejected, and therefore this sevara that we brought itself is rejected. In the end, however, we leave the original question unanswered. Be'amine Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. כבשה עשרת ששחטן לשמן ועבד הלחם, מהו שיזרוק דמן שלא לשמן להתיר בשר באכילה? Rabbi Yirmiyah asks Rabbi Zera, let's say you had the 2 sheep for Shavuot, and you did shechita for the sake of Shavuot. You did everything good, and you had the bread with it. But then the bread got lost afterwards. So officially the halacha, as we learned before, is that since at the time of shechita they were both there and you did the shechita lishma, now they become connected to each other. So they are both necessary for each other. And therefore, if the bread gets lost, then the korbanot become invalid. You cannot continue with their service. That would be the official law. Now here's the thing, Rabbi Yirmiyah is wondering, maybe we can find a loophole and save these animals. How? By doing the zedikah of the blood for these animals for the sake of a shilamim, a regular shilamim, or any other type of korban, but not for the sake of the shilamim of Shavuot. And since a kibseh aseret, if you do it shelo lishman, it is valid as just a regular shilamim. And since it's just a regular shilamim, which there's no connection to lechem, then we can continue, sprinkle the blood, and the meat will be permitted. So what do you say? Can we do it, if we do it lishman, as a korban for Shavuot? That's no good because, hey, where's the accompanying bread? Oh, it's lost. But it's bound to each other. So if you do it lishman, it's no good. So how about do it lishelo lishman, and then it will be a valid sacrifice. Rabbi Zera answers, Amar le, יש לך דבר שאינו קשה לשמוע וקשה שלא לשמוע. Bizarah says, this doesn't make sense. It's a logical paradox. Can there be something that if you offer it lishma with the proper intention, it's meant to be aseret, kibseh aseret. However, if you do it as kibseh aseret, then it will not be kosher. But if you do it shelo lishma, which you're now violating a transgression, you're not supposed to take a korban that's meant for A and have in mind it's for B. So you do it shelo lishma, then it is kasher. Can't be. It makes no sense. It's a paradox, and therefore it must be wrong. Okay, now we're going to ask a series of questions on this statement of Rabbi Zerah, because is that true? Velo? We actually do find some other cases where you can have such a paradox. What about Korban Pesach? You have an animal that's designated to be your Korban Pesach. Now, ideally, you'd wait till the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon and have in mind that it's a Korban Pesach, and then everything will be good. Fine. What if you offer it in the morning of the 14th? That's not the time of Korban Pesach. So if you have in mind in the morning that it's going to be Lishma for Korban Pesach, it's invalid because that's not the right time. However, in the morning, if you take this very same animal and you do Shechita having in mind it's going to be just a regular Shilamim, then it is valid. So there you go. Here's a Korban that was designated for Korban Pesach, and in the morning of the 14th, if you do it Lishma, it's not kosher. Shelo lishma, it is kosher. So we ask about Rabbi Zerah. Rabbi Zerah, what's your problem? We do find such a precedent to have a paradox like this. And so now we answer, no. This is what Rabbi Zerah meant to say. Hachi ka'amina. Yesh לך דבר שנראה לשמו ונדחה מלשמו ואינו קשה לשמו וקשה שלא לשמו. We're adding an extra step to it to exclude this case. Is there anything that at first was fit to be offered? We're comparing this to the kibseh aseret. So the kibseh aseret it was paired up with lechem, and you did shechita properly. So that's nir'eh. It's everything's going well, and you can then sprinkle it lishma. However, because the bread was lost, now it's nidcheh. Now it's rejected. You can't use it anymore as a korban for Shavuot. And yet, if you do it lishma, it will not be good. But if you do it shelo lishma, it will be good. If you keep in mind that it's going to be for Shavuot, for the shtar lechem, then it's invalid. But if you do it just as a regular shilamim, it is valid. So here, since we're adding this, so now the 14th in the morning, this was actually never yet fit to be a Korban Pesach. So that's why this new formulation will not include Korban Pesach on the 14th in the morning, which is not yet fit. But this one, at first, it was fit when you had the bread with it. Okay, so is there anything like that? That would be a precedent? And so we say, actually, to be Zerah, there is. Velo, vade Pesach, achar zemano, bisharimot hashana. The words kodem chasot do not belong here. So don't read those. There is. It's also about Korban Pesach, and this is after the 14th. Any other time of the year. You come a few days later, sometime, and you take this very Korban Pesach. You didn't do shechita on it on Pesach for whatever reason. You had another one. And now you take it some days later, and you do shechita on it, and you have in mind shelo lishma, it becomes a korban shelamim. And you can't make it a korban pesach during the rest of the year, but you can have in mind it's a korban shelamim. So this fits the bill, because this is something that it was fit to be slaughtered lishma as a korban pesach on Pesach and on the 14th in the afternoon, and then it became nidche after the afternoon is finished. Then you cannot bring it as a Korban Pesach anymore. And later on, if you bring it as a Korban Pesach, it's invalid. But if you bring it as Shelo Lishma, as a Korban Shelamim, then it is fit. So look, there is such a precedent for such a case. So Rabbi Zerah, what's your problem? And so now we reformulate Rabbi Zerah again to exclude this case. Hachi kamina. Yesh לך דבר שנראה לשמו ונשחט לשמו ונדחה מלשמו. Is there anything like the kibseh aseret that at first you had the lechem that you paired up with it, you waved them all together when it was alive, and and you did shechita also. You did shechita on the kibseh aseret with the bread, and while it was still there, and you had in mind when doing shechita, it would be for Shavuot. Now, this will not, once you say nishchat, that excludes the Pesach, because it was not the Pesach, you did not do shechita on it at the time when it could be a Korban Pesach. So by adding this phrase, so that will exclude the case that we just said. And then it became invalid because the bread was lost, and yet, if you do the sprinkling, having in mind it's for Shavuot, it's no good. But if you do sprinkling having in mind some other korban, then it is good. So is there ever any other precedent like this? This is a paradox. It's illogical to be Zedaz asking. And we ask about this too. Velo v'hare todah. Korban todah fits this bill exactly. Korban todah also, you bring the 40 loaves together with it. So let's say Korban todah, where it's fit. You have 40 loaves together with it, and you do shechita of the Korban Todah, having in mind Shilot Lishma, that it's going to be for Korban Todah. And then after the shechita, the bread gets lost or it gets broken. So we saw the halacha is that the Korban Todah, you know what you should do? Do the sprinkling as a regular shilamim, not as a Korban Todah, because you don't have the bread with it. But if you do have in mind, keeping it in mind that it's doing the sprinkling as a regular shilamim, then the animal can be saved and it can be eaten as a regular shalamim. It will not fulfill the obligation of the owner. He has to bring another korban todah. But here you can bring here's an exact example where if you did it for a korban, if you did the sprinkling for a korban todah, it's no good. But if you did the sprinkling as a korban shalamim, it is good. So we have a precedent. And Rabbi Zara can answer, Shane Todah derachamana karya shelamim. Todah is different because the Torah itself calls it both Todah and also calls it shelamim. And therefore, it can always default to a shelamim. This is not something that is really shelo lishma. It's part of its name, actually. It's ideally a korban Todah. And now, well, you don't have the bread. Okay, so have in mind korban shelamim. That's still okay. You're not doing it shelo lishma for a completely different type of korban, because todah is also within the category of shelamim. And that's why, when you have in mind it'll be for a shelamim, that's okay. It's not a paradox. You can't be a todah anymore. Okay, it'll just default to a shelamim. That's not the same as the kibseh aseret, which is something special. It's only called that. It's called a shelamim, but only it has no other name. And this is designated only for Shavuot. And therefore, if it now cannot fulfill the obligation for kibseh aseret because the bread is gone, then it cannot default to anything else. What you're doing instead is actually making it shelo lishma. You're having in mind an intention for a different korban altogether. And that, Rabbi Zera said, there is no precedent for, and therefore he says, no, you cannot use this loophole. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.